Hello, I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. And once again, today we have an awesome guest. And this is a reciprocating relationship here. I was on Marie's show recently and we hit it off so well. And we have such similar passions, similar objectives to help people, to improve lives, to increase the well being of humans. And I invited her on my show. So now I get a pick on her, turn the spotlight on her. Let's talk about Jeff Johnston and more about Marie Alessi. So welcome from the beautiful part of the world. Tell everybody where you're from. Where are you calling in from?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm calling in from Sydney, Australia. So we're literally just south of Sydney in a very beautiful little town just before, so it's suburbs in front of Sydney, basically. So, yeah, that's where I'm coming from, the other side of the world. How are you, Jeff?
I've never been there, but I'm going to go there
Yet.
someday. That I had a trip planned about 15 years ago to
Wow.
go to Australia, New Zealand, and
Oh,
it
it's so
fell
beautiful.
through. Yeah, it fell through. We never ended up going. So,
Yeah.
but no, that's part of the world. I certainly want to go. But
Yeah.
listen, I'm honored to have you on the Living Undeterred podcast.
So
You
am I.
embody what Living Undeterred is all about. And why don't we just start off a little bit? I know you're the founder of Loving Life After Loss. And I have to kind of smile because I met a friend, Chris Krupar, that you introduced me to,
Yes. Oh my
and he
God.
goes by Loving Life After,
Yes.
and he leaves it blank.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an awesome way to start a conversation. Is I'm going to ask you, loving life after loss. What
Yeah.
does that mean to you? And again, I admire your strength. When my followers and listeners hear your story, they're going to see why I had you on the show.
Yeah. Before we dive into the story, I just want to quickly say I am so stoked that you and Chris connected. I just knew when I met you, I had to introduce you to Chris. And the funny part is that you mentioned that with the name, because this is how I met Chris. I actually, before I had shortcut my group, when you create these shortcuts, um, I typed it in. And one day when I typed in Loving Life after his group came up, or his website, I'm like, hold on, who's that dude who's got my name, like sort of part of my name, really. And I had a look at what he did, and I was so fascinated by him. And yeah, he's now one of my moderators in Loving Love After Loss, because we are so aligned. And yeah, so I really had to introduce the two of you, and I'm so grateful that you had this connection now. So Loving Love After Loss was started by me because my husband passed very suddenly in 2018 from a brain aneurysm. So Rob went on a business trip and he never came home. There was no
Hmm.
goodbye. There was no pre-warning. He was in the prime of his life, 45 years old, super fit, healthy surfer. And yeah, he was literally unplugged. That's the exact vision I have in my head, of him passing away. Um, so as you can imagine, it was like somebody pulled the rug underneath our feet. It was so unexpected. Like when I received that
How
phone
old was
call,
he?
45,
And there was no indication, no
nothing,
hint, no
nothing.
family history. And go back to that day.
Yeah,
I mean, often I wonder about triggering somebody by answering these questions, but
no,
you
it's
and I
absolutely
talked
fine. I've talked so
yeah, we've
much
talked
about
at a
it now.
deep level
It's
about this stuff.
absolutely
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah,
It's therapeutic. But so the
yeah.
moment, the last time you saw him and
Hmm.
stuff, obviously that doesn't cross your mind. But now looking back in hindsight, I
Mm.
think you've probably developed a tremendous sense of gratitude
Yeah.
for the relationships that you have with
Oh,
people now,
100%.
right?
Yeah. So I want to backtrack here very quickly, although that's like 20 something years prior. But I lost my dad when I was 20. And I often talk about the hidden gifts in adversity. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest gifts that I got through my dad's passing was to live my life with no regrets. Like, seriously, no regrets. Like, every time when I meet someone, and it doesn't matter if that's somebody walking past me on the street or if that's a close friend of mine that I've known for forever, I do tell people what I think. I would tell a stranger if her hair looks amazing or her dress is really cute or whatever, because that's what I do all the time. I have this, and it's not so much out of fear that I could be missing out again, because that's where it originally came from. When my dad passed,
Yeah.
I didn't know it was the last time I would see him, although he had cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So I missed that whole saying goodbye and having our last conversation, all that, because I think I just didn't want to know that he would die. And Part of
Right.
me knew, but I didn't want to. And I was so young. And also, I didn't have that whole spiritual background back then and the tools that I have now. So I was in a very, very different state. I was not coping well with it. But the one thing I got from it was to never live anything, without saying what you mean, without saying what you feel. I think there
Yeah.
wasn't one day in
Hmm.
my 13 years that I had with Rob where I didn't tell him that I loved him, not out of habit, but because I really felt it and I really wanted him to know. And luckily, he was the exact same. So we really had this incredible relationship that everybody looked up to. People were always like, "Oh, you and Rob, you just unbelievable." Like we were still so deeply in love after 13 years of marriage. There were no major
Mhm.
arguments in our relationship because we communicated really well, and it was our priority. We really, really loved life. We loved each other, and Rob never missed a chance of putting me in a pedestal and raving about me all the time. Like his workmates even came up to me at the funeral and told me that. So the moment before, and I remember that so well because it was a public holiday on the Monday, and Rob flew to the other side of Australia for a business trip. And because it was a Sunday when he left, we live so close to the station, and it's just so much nicer to jump on the train to the airport than driving. You don't have to worry about parking, it's super handy. So because it was a Sunday, we all walked him to the station. And in hindsight, I'm so glad that we had this moment because, none of
Right.
us knew it was our last. However, here's the thing, and I'm still getting goosebumps just talking about this. We walked him to the
Hmm.
station and we were waiting for the train to roll in, and I had this weird, very distinct nudge, take a photo. So I took a couple of
Hmm.
photos of Rob and the boys, and they're all hugging Dad, and then we're saying goodbye. And it's a little quirky family thing that we had that Jed, my little one, always had to have the last kiss and hug. He was 10
Hmm.
years at the time, and he had this
Hmm.
thing. He had to have the last kiss and hug. And that day, I got the last
Hmm.
kiss and hug, and I was like, yay! And it was like cheeky and fun, and nobody thought anything about it, but it means so much to me. It was just I don't even think Jed realized. So there was no, oh my God, that last time I saw Dad,
Right.
my mom got the last one. So that wasn't there at all. It was just, I just sneaked it in, and Rob and I just grinned at each other, and, train closes and leaves. And I'm turning around, again, I had this nudge, and I took a photo of the train leaving. And I
Wow.
thought, how bizarre is that? And then the next day, he was in Perth in Western Australia, and we had our last conversation without knowing. And that last conversation was about love and connection. It was just so beautiful. He
Wow.
told me this story of a young couple he met, and Dad had invited him to sit with him at dinner because we were lining up together in a restaurant and got chatting. And we're like, oh, we see you sit alone, sit with us. And he was so tired. He didn't want to. He had like all this traveling. He's been working all day. He was so tired. But he said, I couldn't say no. They were so lovely. And one of them, I believe it was her, came from Treviso, which is a town in Italy where Rob's dad came from. So it was
Hmm.
just so funny how like all these things happen. And we talk about love and connection. And the next day, he was supposed to wake me up at 7:30 because my phone was not updating or something going. I said I don't know how to set the alarm because my phone's not updated. I said I'll ring you because I have to be up anyway, and he didn't.
Hmm.
So I woke up at 7:31. He was supposed to call me at 7:30, and I remember so well. I've still got this burnt in my memory. Looking at the clock, 7:31. I'm like, that's odd. Rob was always on time, always. It was never late, not even a minute. It was just um, so reliable. And this is where I had this first little "there's something wrong. And then I
Hmm.
tried to text him, I tried to call him, but as a mom, you get the kids ready for school, you get busy and
Right.
distracted, and then he still hadn't called, he still hadn't texted, and I kept texting him, babe, you okay? I haven't heard from you, just wanted to check in, and then you keep making excuses, and you're like, oh, I'm making excuses now, what's going on there? And maybe he left the phone in a hotel, maybe he left it in the cab, maybe, like all these
Right.
things come up, and you're like,
Which are normal, perfectly normal.
yeah, but something
Yep.
within me knew there was something not right. I could feel it, and Rob and I were so connected. And then at lunchtime, it occurred to me that I had the hotel where he was staying. So I thought, I'm going to give the hotel a call. I just need to know. I need to get this out of my head. This is driving me mental. Like, seriously, I know I shouldn't use this term too lightly, but I was really,
Sure.
like, the anxiety levels were rising, and I just thought, okay. So I called the hotel, and as I'm dialing the number, I had this very short vision, like literally just like a split second, of Rob collapsing in
Hmm.
a shower. And I'm like, oh, Marie, stop it. You are driving yourself crazy right now. Just stop it. Don't buy into this, you know. But because I had this vision, when I had them on the phone, I said, look, you know, I believe my husband's staying with you, and can you please check in through? I said, please don't think I'm one of those freaked out wives stalking her husband, but you're supposed to call
Yeah.
me, and I really feel there's something not right with him. Can you please check in his hotel room? And then I said, and can you please check in the shower? And she was like, okay. So that's where they found him. He collapsed in a shower and died from the brain aneurysm. So it was really quite
Wow.
incredible that I had this vision. And yeah, and then eventually in the afternoon, I got the phone call because I kept ringing and I kept ringing and I kept ringing, and then the hotel didn't pick up anymore. And in my mind, there's something wrong. They know my number now.
Mm.
They're not picking up. There's something wrong. You know, I knew it was a small hotel, so it's not that, you know, there's a switchboard and everybody picked up. I just had this incline. I was like, there's something not right. And then I eventually called his boss, and he said, look, Marie, just calm down. I'll see what I can do. And I'll ring the people that he was supposed to be in a meeting today. I'll just call with them and check in if he's okay. And they said, no, he never showed up for the meeting. And then I
Mm.
just knew, because Rob would never not show up for a meeting, you know, it's just so, but that dragging on that was the torture for me, the not knowing, because they have their procedures. Police is not allowed to tell
Hmm.
you over the phone. They're supposed to send
Oh, sure.
local police to
Yep.
you. And they couldn't find anyone because we're in such a small town here, just before Sydney. There's no manned police station, so they couldn't find anyone. And I kept ringing, and then luckily, um, the coroner's officer just made a decision. And he said, I just had to make a decision. I had to put you out of your misery. I could see the phone was right next to me, and it kept ringing, and your photo kept popping up. And I just knew. He said, I've got two boys myself. I'm a family man. I could not
Wow.
even believe what you must be going through. And so he decided to give me a call. And here's the
How long
weirdest
ago was
part
this?
about it. It's almost 4 years now, so it'll be 4 years in
Oh,
June.
okay.
And the weirdest
Okay.
part about that was when he called me and he said, it's a coroner's, sergeant from the coroner's office. I had this horrible bilingual brain moment, because my mother tongue is German, so my level of English is quite high, as you can tell. But there are these quirky things that every now and then the word that pops up you've never heard before. I have never heard the
Mm.
word coroner's office before, so I didn't even know what he was talking about. So when he called me and said,
Mm.
Sergeant such and such from the coroner's office, I was still waiting for him to tell me there was an accident or he's in hospital, or,
Yeah.
so it was this dragged on till reality hit me. And then it just felt surreal, just hearing these news. Yeah.
So immediately after this happened,
Yeah.
I could, my story.
Yes.
For 14 months, I struggled
Mm.
immensely. My
Yeah.
wife and I both did.
Mm.
So you seem to now kind of righted the ship. You seem to be doing your podcast and
Yeah.
your advocacy for mental health and your
Mm.
connectivity you have with other people like myself and Chris.
Yeah.
And I've seen some of your podcasts. You had just had a guy from Iowa on, it looks like,
Yeah.
too. Um,
Incredible. It was
which is
incredible.
ironic because that's where I'm from. We're
Yeah, I thought
probably
of
not very
you
far
guys straight
away.
away. Now I was like, oh, he's doing the tour. I need to connect you with Jess.
But so right after this happened, how
Yeah.
long did it take you to get to where you are today, which has only been 4 years? And I know people that are 4 years in grieving right now, and
Yeah.
they're literally no further than they were 4 months into it. I
Yeah.
know people in 4 months that are way ahead. So
Yeah.
everyone grieves differently. But how long did it take you to get to starting to see, hey, I need to get my life turned around?
Yeah.
You know?
Um, I have to be super honest with you here. It took a split second. And
Okay.
here comes another blessing, because I understand, and I'm saying this with all due respect, I
Yeah,
so
I want you to be
understand.
honest. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I so understand that. And I'm very grateful that you asked that question, because, as you said, I do understand there are so many people out there who years down the track, still haven't even started the grieving process, or still haven't
Right.
even, and they think they're grieving, but they're stuck in the pain. They're not really grieving,
Yeah.
so they're not
Right.
processing anything. They're stuck in the pain. They're stuck in a cycle, often in that mental cycle of reliving and not finding one step out. And here is the blessing in disguise. Rob and I, like, not just that I already had that previous, the gifts in adversity from my dad, and then a very, very close friend of mine died in his very early 30s or late 20s. So we were all around that age. And, I've seen a few people die that were close to me in my life, but this one was
Hmm.
obviously different. That was my husband. It was
Oh,
the dad
sure.
of our children. Yet Rob and I had moments when we did hear about, an accident on the street or whatever, and then you talk about life, you talk about what ifs.
Right.
And we
Yep.
had these conversations a couple of times where we said, if something was ever to happen to me, I want you to take the boys and create the happiest life possible. I mean it. And we
Mm.
both meant that. We both really, really wholeheartedly meant it. There was no question about that.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Yet there's one thing when you talk about it, it's theory, and the other thing when it all of a sudden happens, and you're like, have to break the
100%. Yep.
news to your boys that it actually happened.
Right.
Obviously, the boys were never part of that conversation, but we were. And due to my background, not just to losing my dad at an early age, but also I had worked as a mindset mentor for 7+ years prior to Rob's passing. So I had all these tools available to me in terms of
Right.
mindset, in terms of what do you need to focus on. And at first, I have to say, I switched into functioning mode. I call it functioning mode because you just tick off the boxes. You just next thing, what do you need to do, next step. Obviously, I had to tell the boys, which was really the hardest thing I ever had to do in my entire
Yeah,
life.
I
It
agree.
was
Yep.
just gut wrenching, heartbreaking. It really it pierced my heart having to tell them, and not just hearing them cry, but hearing them scream. That was
Hmm.
really. I have no words. I have no words.
Hmm.
And so I went into this whole, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? I have to drive to mum and dad, Rob's mum and dad, and tell them, because there's no way I would want them to hear that over the phone. On the way, I told his
Right.
brothers and sisters. Then there was the us flying to Perth the next day to identify his body, organizing that, getting that organized by Rob's work, luckily. Going home, getting packed, flying there, doing that, staying for a few days, coming home, picking my mum up from the airport. My mum was flying out to us to come to my son's first Holy Communion. Her flight was already booked.
Mm.
A freak timing that she
Yeah.
came in time for the funeral too. It was really, because she lives in Austria still. Um, so that all happened, and then obviously arranging the funeral, there were so many things to organize and arrange, and the wake. And so I literally went into this step-by-step functioning mode, just ticking off all the boxes. Yet somewhere along the way, very quickly, that decision kicked in that I have to create the happiest life possible for me and the boys. This
Hmm.
is now my um, sole responsibility. And Flynn, my oldest son, he was 10 at the time. The first question he asked me was like, who's going to look after us now, Mum? And I said, I will.
Yeah.
I will look after us.
Yeah.
And I said, I will look after you. So it was really important for me to say that out loud. And I think this is when it kicked in, that promise that we had made to each other to create a happy life. And most people didn't
Right.
understand that. Most people looked at me as like, oh, she's not grieving properly. She's still in denial. She's in shock. People tried to
Well,
push
it's
me in
the
all
old.
sorts of labels and did not know what to do with me, that I was doing my best to focus on happiness. And honestly, it is such a simple decision, but it's not easy.
I
And
know.
it's just,
I like the way you say that
yeah.
because I present, when I do a lot of this talking, I talk
Mm,
about two roads, the metaphor of two
mm,
roads. And
mm-hmm.
when I talk to my boys, I say, there are two
Absolutely.
roads, but there's really only one road.
That I want you to
Like you
come on.
said,
Yeah.
there's only one choice, and
Yeah.
that's the better road. And
Yeah. I
the
love
bitter
that.
road's there, it's for everybody,
Mm.
but I think you know the outcome if you go down the bitter
Oh,
road.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
misery, death. It's just not a good
Mm,
place to go.
mm.
And so, how do you define grief? What
Yeah.
there's a Kubler-Ross has the 5 stages of grief that I studied in college, and I
Yeah.
know it. I used to know it really well. And there's so many books out there on grief, but it seems like to me, everybody writes their own book, and you have a
Yeah.
very unique perspective, and you've
Yeah.
learned to reframe things. But how do you define for you, Marie? How
Yeah.
do you find grief?
I'm so happy that you asked me that, because here's the one thing. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, everybody knows her in the field of grief,
Yep.
has defined those 5 stages for terminally ill people. It was never intended
Mm.
for grief. And
I didn't
so,
know that till right now. I
yeah,
didn't know that till right now.
and that's why I
I mean,
share
I
it
did, but I
in
probably
every,
forgot.
yeah, in every podcast when I get asked this question, and it comes literally in every second podcast, because it's such an obvious thing to talk about, the 5 stages of grief. But they are not. There are 5 stages for terminally ill people. And when you think about it, the anger, the
Interesting.
bargaining, the denial,
Yeah.
that makes sense in when you know that you're
And they're not
terminally
in that
ill.
order either. They're
Exactly. They
when I
come
wrote
in
my book,
all,
I said,
yeah,
yeah, my grieving was all out of whack. I mean,
yeah,
all out of whack. And
yeah.
I never really had anger.
Me neither.
I never did.
Yeah,
Anger was one of the stages that I just kind of didn't have
yeah.
time for.
Well,
And
and because the stages are
um,
not for grief, they are for terminally ill people. So it doesn't surprise me that I had
interesting.
literally none of those stages.
So
I mean,
what are your
shock, of
stages?
course,
What
shock is, of course, there is shock when you hear something like that. That's no question asked. But those stages were for terminally ill people. So I just want to put that aside, because it's really quite interesting how that somehow at some stage got muddled up. And ever since, people talk about it as stages of grief, and they're not. So
so
I
what would be
don't,
stages of grief that you would be for
yeah.
grief that aren't for
I
terminal?
don't believe that there are stages at all. I believe that grief
Hmm.
is just as unique as the person experiencing it. Every story is unique. Every
Yeah,
circumstances are unique. Every combinations of circumstances and stories are unique. So I don't believe in stages. But what
I
I
love that.
believe in, because you asked me, what grief means to me. So grief to me is literally just a process that you're going through. Literally
Hmm.
allowing yourself to process, and not everybody's doing that. That's why I said at the beginning, people say, I'm stuck in grief. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're stuck in pain. You're not even grieving yet. Grieving is a process.
People.
Grieving is that allowing yourself to opening up to actually working through it. So the way I did it was that, and this is what my entire movement is about. My focus was on happiness, on healing, on joyful
Hmm.
moments. How can I create that? I literally
Hmm.
constantly asked myself, how can I make my boy's life as amazing as possible? That was my only focus, my sole focus as a parent,
Right.
to create a happy life for them. And then, of course, when you focus on making a happy life for your boys, it usually has a very positive effect on yourself as well. And this is how I started grieving, because grieving to me was a process that happened on the sideline. And a lot of people put a lot more focus into that, but I've put my focus on healing, on happiness, on hope, on going forward. So the grief happened to me on the sideline. When I broke down, I broke down. When I cried, I cried. When I screamed, I screamed. I had one nervous breakdown that was intense. And that's when I realized,
Yeah.
hold on, I need support for myself. I ended up screaming
Yeah.
on the floor of my kitchen, like whacking the cupboards and
Yeah.
screaming on top of my lungs. I just need peace and
Yeah.
quiet. I just collapsed over
L-
that one sentence, and I screamed it over and over again. And then I got help. I started working with a positive psychologist for about 4 months, which I loved. It was like a fast forward session every time, because of my background. It was like planting seeds in a very fertile ground. Everything she gave
Let
me,
me
it just,
jump back.
yeah,
I want to go
please.
back to something before we get too far ahead.
Absolutely.
About the process you talked about,
Yeah.
because I completely agree.
Mm,
In my book, I make a statement that it's not my own words; it's
mm,
something I heard. But I think too many people look at grief as an event.
mhm.
Like even the phrase
Absolutely.
"get over it,"
Yeah.
that means you're assuming one day there's an event where I will be
Yeah.
over it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's evolution.
Yeah.
It's a
I love that.
process.
Absolutely.
It never
Perfect word
ends.
for it.
It never ends. And
Mm.
I think we just look at, if you watch a lot of the motivational speakers and coaches and stuff, and everything's like, step one, tier
Yeah.
two, like, grief is like, okay, we're going to get through this. It's like,
Yeah.
I think that's an illusion in of itself to
Mm.
think that you're going to get over it. I think you're setting yourself up for disaster.
Mm.
It's like, It's like one of the reasons why I don't count my days for not drinking alcohol, because I
Mm,
allow myself the ability to have a drink, and I'm not going to punish myself.
yeah.
It's just a process. And I think we look at grief as like, I'm supposed to, like, it's an event. It's like,
Mm,
it's over, and it's like,
yeah.
I think if we could change how we change the narrative on our mindset, like you,
Yeah.
you talk about mindset a lot. I
Mm.
love that. I'm just really perplexed on why society's so hung up on
Oh no.
looking at grief. I think it's how, no different than our relationship with death, Marie,
Yeah.
is that, death is painted as this, horrific, everyone's in black, everyone's crying, there's sad music playing, there's this
Yeah. The
processional.
typical
It's like
widow.
the image, yeah, the image in our mind is just so bleak. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm sure obviously the moment that you and I got those calls, sure, it
Mm,
was just like that,
yeah.
but it really is a choice to stay there.
Mm,
It's a
yes.
choice to stay in that
Yes.
misery,
And you know
right?
what? I always I say exactly that, healing and happiness are a choice. Like both of them are choices
Yeah.
that we can make or we can't. And so often when people are it's like, not choosing is a choice as well. People don't understand that. When you don't choose, that's a
So
choice as well. You choose that you
people are going to
stay.
say, okay, Marie, that's great.
Mm.
How do I do it? So you tell
Yeah.
me action steps. You're a
Yeah,
coach.
absolutely.
And I was going to ask you too at some point the difference between a coach and a counselor.
Yeah.
I hear those words thrown around, but before we get
Well,
there, what
yeah,
are
yeah,
some
no,
action steps? What are some
absolutely.
things people can start doing?
Yeah. So basically, difference between a coach and counselor, I can answer that very quickly, and then I get to the action steps
Hmm.
because it's just literally the background. Their training is different. So counseling is more like for psychology based, and coaching is more for mindset and action steps. It's like
Yeah.
the work can be very very similar. The background is different, and the degrees that they carry are different, and how they get rebates from Medicare, etc. You don't get rebate for coaching. You get rebate from counseling. So
Right.
yeah, there are a couple of differences, but
Yeah.
to the action steps. So for me, I developed a little journey, a healing journey called From Grief to Relief. And for me, I did that literally for people to find their first steps out of the pain. That
Mm.
was the most important thing for me. I'm like, how can I help you stop the pain? That's the first thing I want to do. It's like when people come to an emergency room, they're hurt, stop the pain immediately as soon as you can. So I want to do that
Hmm.
for people. And that's where I have developed 7 steps to get through. And it was a trial and error for me as well because I tried it with 7, with 14, with 10, with 9, and I felt like the 7 steps just felt right to me. I've tried this over the
Hmm.
years in my mentoring group. I got feedback from people who went through it and said, "What helped you the most? What did you?" And I felt that was the easiest to get through. And I hope I can remember all of them there in the row. But like the number one thing for me, the very most important step for me was when you first get started. People often look at they lost everything with that one person, which is not true.
Hmm.
It's a
Right.
perception of
Right.
yourself that you lose everything with one person, but
Right.
it's actually not true. So for me, the very first step is always like to separate who you have lost from what you have lost. And
Hmm.
I always
Yeah.
invite people to sit with, okay, what is it that you miss the most? What are the things that you really, really miss the most? For me, that was physical touch because that's my major love language is physical touch, quality time, and obviously that was
Right.
completely gone. I couldn't hug Rob anymore, so the physical presence was really the toughest one for me. There were things like feeling safe. Rob was my knight in shining armor. I was always protected
Right.
with him. I always felt safe with him, and there I was with 2 young boys on my own, and
Hmm.
the feeling that you're always admired, cared for, nurtured. He was such a nurturer. His love language was
Hmm.
acts of services. So I was constantly looked after, pampered, nurtured. He was incredible. Like he was such a hands-on husband and dad. And so I went through that whole list of the things that I missed the most about being with Rob, about having him in our lives. And the next step for me was and I literally took it out of my own experience. I literally just, whatever worked for me, I wanted to teach others. And the second step for me was to sit with that list and go like, okay, how can I recreate this for me so it works for me? And this is not about replacing anyone. This is not about, okay, Rob's gone, let's just get somebody else to do these things. This is horrible. This is really just about empowering yourself. This is self-empowerment. What can I do? Or I should say, what can I do? That to go through that list. And I'm a hugger. Like, my boys hug me all the time. And no, it's not the same as hugging your husband. Of course not. It's something completely different. But I got so many more hugs from other people because I really needed that. I needed that feeling of being held.
Oh,
And,
I
when my
understand. Yep.
friends stopped in, they just hugged me straight away because they know.
Yep.
I did things like I pushed my bed into one corner because I felt it more cozy and I felt more safe sleeping in a corner rather than having,
Yeah.
the sides to my bed. I made sure
Yep.
that the front and back door was locked before I went to bed. So I didn't have to lay in bed worrying about, oh, did I actually lock the front door? Could somebody walk in the middle of the
Right.
night? Things like that.
Right.
So it's really going back into what can you actually do rather than what can't I do?
Does it go back to focus on what you can control and not
Yes,
worry about those things you can't
absolutely.
control?
Yes, I love that.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's
So,
so much out there now about,
yeah.
especially the resurgence of Stoicism, which is a big part of my life.
Yes.
I've
I only
Marcus
just got
Aurelius and
more and more into
Seneca.
that now. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually learned about it back in college, and I just
Yeah.
kind of forgot about it because
Same.
my previous life
Completely gone.
my
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
previous life was all about making money, and then
Mm.
all this stuff happens, and now that's not important to me.
Yeah.
But so I go back and I think of the kind of the main principles of Stoicism, and
Mhm.
so much of it is focus on your what you can control, the
Yes.
things that you can control. Like you
Mm.
can control what goes in your mouth.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah. Like
control
coconut water
drinking, you
with
can control eating.
watermelon and mint.
Yeah. And I have a purple zero Gatorade. So, um, but
Cheers.
I
So
could be
nicely
I could
color
be sipping a
coordinated.
glass of wine, and
Yeah.
so and so the choice thing is why one of the reasons why I called my nonprofit the Choices Network,
Mhm.
because I was very hypersensitive on not lecturing people and saying we're the sober living network, or
Yeah.
I'm the anti-drug coalition. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm not anti-drugs.
I
I'm
love that you call
anti-abuse
them
of
choices.
drugs.
It's perfect.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
there was intention when I came up with the Choices Network, because I knew as I started building this Living Undeterred brand that I'm
Mm.
working on, is that I always want to go back to choices.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
think
I
I
love
go
it.
back and look
One of
at
my
my
favorites.
son Seth and look at my wife, and it
Mm.
was just a series, probably literally thousands of small little choices. So
Mm.
I have to show you something that's pretty
Yeah.
interesting. I think you'll like this. So this
I love him. I
this
saw him
this is
already.
Pace. This is Pace the penguin,
Yeah.
and Pace is our mascot for our tour. And people
Yeah.
wonder, why do I have a penguin? Well, I talk about choices.
Yeah.
Well, for kids, what we're trying to do is have these available for parents. They're
Mhm.
cute, so I may have one anyway for me. But the thing is that we want to be able to have kids or parents take Pace home and sit down with their
Mm.
5-year-old. This isn't for junior high kids
Yeah.
or high school kids. These are for the little kids,
Yeah.
and sit down and say, you know what this penguin represents? This penguin represents patience. His name is Pace, and he's a penguin. He
Mm.
wasn't he wasn't gifted with cheetah speed. He doesn't have, eagle eyes. He doesn't have, hawk
Mhm.
wings. He's a penguin. Probably the worst
Yeah.
gifts to be successful in life. He has wings, but he can't fly. He can't run. And
Yeah.
so, but you know what? He gets to where he's going because he's patient. So
Mm.
you can say when you're getting bullied, or somebody says you're fat or ugly, or
Mm.
somebody, whatever, or your grades
Yeah.
aren't going well, or you're mad at mom and dad,
Mm.
think of Pace the penguin. So
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about grief and how it's a process and stuff. So
Mm.
we're trying to find these metaphors for kids
Yeah.
instead of just saying, you know what, don't drink. Don't do
Yeah.
this. Don't do
And
that.
don't doesn't
How
work
how how
anyway.
well
We
does
all know
that
that.
work?
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And it just
Mm.
encourages them to, why aren't they telling me to do that?
Mm.
It encourages them to do it. So I think, part of what we're trying to do at Living Undeterred, and what you're trying to do as well, is find those alternative tools, those
Yeah.
alternative ways to look at this. And I know you're
100%.
big into mindfulness. I'm big
Mhm.
into mindfulness as well. And I don't know, I think I'm more encouraged than I am pessimistic
Yeah.
about fixing this mental health crisis that we have.
Mm.
And I know you are too.
Yeah.
I had to show you
Absolutely.
Pace. I'm
I love it.
I
I love it. And you know what I love
I'll
so
send you
much?
one. I'll
It's the
send you one.
oh, really? Oh, I love it.
I will.
It's
I'll send you
beautiful.
one.
It's such a beautiful metaphor. I love that you're using that, and I also love that you're looking for something for small kids, because this is really where we need to get started. And the whole
We
don't
do.
don't is the best way
Yep.
to make them try it one day. If we use the word
Right.
don't, the subconscious mind doesn't even understand the word don't. So if you say don't drink, they're like, oh,
Mhm.
drinking, hold on. That's how the subconscious mind works. So the mind is so so powerful, and for me, when I was going through all these steps, one of them is just observing your thoughts. Like if you slide into a moment where you feel the negative thoughts are taking over, and they're just, I had this one moment, and I share this in my little healing journey, when I came back from traveling around the world with the boys. So I took them on a 2 months around the world trip, which was incredible. And
Good for you. That's awesome.
yeah, we just really, I felt we needed to get away after everything that happened, the funeral, etc. Like, and then I actually wrote a book as well. Like in a very short amount of time, or like 4 weeks, I had this massive download of writing this story and publishing it. And
What's the name of your book?
Loving Life After Loss. That's what planted a seed for the movement. So that was actually what started it with the name. And when the
And that's
book came
available
out,
on all the platforms and
yeah, it's on,
stuff?
on Amazon, it's on my
Okay.
website, and it became an Amazon number one bestseller, and it ranked in the top 100 of Australia. And I was blown away.
Mm.
Jeff, when I wrote the book, for me, it was like a love legacy for Rob, and I was hoping that I would give some people hope, that there is a different way of coping with it. I did not expect any of it. And
Mhm.
so, as I said, I straight after the book came out, I traveled around the world with the boys. I had the trip planned already. We wanted to be away for all these first milestones, the Christmas, New Year's, both the boys' birthdays are in January. So I just wanted to take them away. And it was the most amazing decision I made. It was incredible. Like, we started off in the Maldives, and then went to the Canary Islands, and then went through Europe, and ended up at
That's
Sentosa
awesome.
Island, and took them to Universal Studios for a birthday. And, it was just really incredible, just
Do
really
you know how
beautiful.
similar our lives are?
Yeah, I
Because
know. That's why I couldn't believe when
my
I met
wife
you. I was like,
my
oh my
wife
God, you're
died at
like a
my
parallel
wife died at
universe.
46.
Yeah,
My wife died at 46. Rob died at 45. I have two boys as
I
well.
know.
You have two boys. Our going around the world is a tour, our RV
Yeah.
tour, going around the country for 95 days.
Yeah, it's
So many
incredible.
and then we both are in this, got thrust into this mental health.
Yeah.
This was the furthest thing from my mind. I was helping
Yeah.
people save money for retirement,
That's
and then
incredible.
just 5 years ago. And now I
Mm.
tell people that in the last year and a half, when Living Undeterred became an entity,
Yeah.
I've got more satisfaction in a year and a half than I did 32 years
Yeah.
helping people save for retirement.
Yeah.
Not even close. Not even
Yeah.
close.
I'm so with you on that, Jeff. And when I talk to you, I still remember going back to my team of moderators, where Chris is in there as well. And I said, he's like the male equivalent to me. Like, there's so many parallels. It's incredible. So that's why I was really looking forward to having you on my show and being here today, because there
Well,
are
there's
a
a lot
lot
more
of,
us. There's a lot
yeah.
more us out there, Marie.
Yes.
I know there are, and that's the
Oh,
beauty of. I think
100%.
Johan Hari said in his TED talk,
Yeah.
that the opposite of addiction was connection,
I
and I
love
think
that.
I
I
think
love that sentence.
that's
It's,
how we we'll never eradicate
yeah.
addiction and substance abuse and all that, but
Mm,
if we know that connectivity and vulnerability and empathy and
yeah.
compassion, not sympathy and pity and
Yeah.
all these other emotions,
Yeah.
but and again, I think there's a lot more. That's just my dog. Don't worry about
It's all
him.
right. I'm
There's a
so used
lot
to
more.
that.
There's just something about that, about what he said about
Yeah.
connection, and I do think that we tend to see only the worst case scenarios. The,
Mm,
the guy that goes up and shoots up a school, or the people that
yeah.
take their own lives, or the people that just are all the depression rates. And it's like there's a lot of Marie Alessis out there. There's a lot of
Mm,
Jeff Johnsons, a lot of Chris Coopars. There's
mm,
a lot of us out there. And I think the more that we get on each other's shows and we
yeah.
share stories and read each other's books,
Yeah.
and instead of being silo shops
Mm,
where we have our own agenda, now we're all together, and
yeah.
I think there's strength
I
in
agree.
numbers. And yeah, I see so much momentum
Mm,
in this opportunity that we have,
yeah.
and together
It's
we
so
can make a difference. I
beautiful.
mean,
Yeah.
literally together we can make a difference.
Yeah, 100%. I just love that you say that, because I've literally just come back from a business retreat that I've been on with my mentoring group about three weeks ago. We were in Melbourne, and I said, one of the three pillars of my business, I want to really just focus on collaboration because I feel like I've got my group, which is one pillar, which is
Mm-hmm.
now, Loving Life After Loss. There are 3,500 people in there to date. And people go, wow, you've grown a group so big. And I'm like, I don't see it as such. I think it's not that
Right.
I'm not honoring it, but for me, it's a fraction of people that I want to reach, a fraction. And I know that I
Right.
can spend the next 10 years growing the group to 10,000, maybe even 100,000 people, but it will still be a fraction of people that are out there suffering and in pain because they are succumbing to expectations of society on how they are supposed to grieve. And I put that on a huge quotation
Right.
marks. Um,
Right.
so for me, it's all about educating. It's all about finding other people like Jeff Johnson, like Chris Krupa, like Justin Stinson, like all the people that I've interviewed in my group and I'm yet to meet and yet to interview, where I'm like, I have already started a little list. There's probably about 10 people on there at the moment that I started 3 weeks ago. I'm like, I want to think about people that would come on board with this to do something bigger together. I really do not know what that's going to look like exactly, but I know it will collaboration and it will be
Yeah.
building and quadrupling our audiences, putting them together to spread the message because people need to hear it. And that's why I'm so pumped that you are about to go on this tour and spread the message throughout America. It's just
I,
incredible because that's what we
I
need to
had a
do.
I had a reporter. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no,
There's a
no,
little
please.
delay in our
No,
conversation.
that's
So,
fine.
um, but I had a reporter ask me the other day. She said, getting our interview for the tour. She said, Jeff, I have a couple questions for you. She said, what problem are you trying to solve?
Mm.
And and what's the reason you're going on the tour? What's the
Yeah,
purpose of the tour? And
yeah.
those are trap questions. I
Mm.
don't I think they're unfair, they're naive, and they're trap questions because how do you answer that
Mm.
when it's an hour answer
Yeah.
and how and whatever I do answer typically, like if someone says, who did you vote for? I mean, that's another trap question. These are
Yeah,
just things that are big trouble. So
yeah,
when someone says, what problem are you trying to solve?
yeah.
I got to thinking, and I talked about this on most of my recent podcasts, but I came to this standard answer, I think is what I'm going to say to everybody to ask me these questions.
Mm.
If what we were doing was working, we
Yeah,
wouldn't be doing the tour.
yeah.
And I think that's a
Yes.
standard
Oh,
application.
I love it.
So someone says, hey, Jeff, why are you doing the tour?
Mm.
If what we were doing was working, we
Yeah,
wouldn't be doing the tour.
yeah,
What problem are you trying to solve? If were doing what we were
yeah,
doing was working.
yeah.
So it's like the reality is if what we were doing
Mm.
was working,
Yeah,
then you and I wouldn't even be talking about this stuff.
yeah.
Um, the problem
You
is
know,
nothing's working. And what is
I
working is very, very isolated.
yeah. I want to share one thing. I recently, like just last week, had the absolute honor to be in a Zoom meeting with Mike Michalowicz, the author of The Pumpkin Plan and Profit First, and all these amazing, amazing, really inspiring business books. And I just literally downloaded his newest book, and it is about being different. I don't know the exact title. Please don't thought me of that, but it's something about being different. Something making a difference, being different, something around that. And I started listening to the book and I just freaking love it. It's just all about, if we all, with grief, it's such a perfect example, the whole wearing black and the whole suffering. And if we're all doing that, and I, I was nervous about it. I'd be lying if I wasn't. When I first opened the doors to that movement, Loving Love After Loss, I felt like jumping off a cliff and
Oh
growing my
yeah,
wings on the
yep, I
way
can
down.
relate.
That's how it felt.
Yep,
And then I remembered, oh, I
yep,
have wings and I just need to spread them. And it was this whole evolution of me stepping into who I already was, but I had to meet that
mhm,
person. I had to really grow
mhm,
within myself and step up and step up and step up. And every time you're like, I'm stepping up, I'm doing this, I'm in leadership, I'm showing people how to do this,
right,
there's still the next level and still the next level. And for me, it's not just about wearing orange, standing out, but it is also, it's
mhm,
about that being seen, because when you're being seen and being heard, this is when you start making a difference and not being shy
mhm,
about saying what you believe in, and not saying, yeah, like there needs to be education spread into the world about, the 5 stages of grief, that they're actually not 5 stages of grief, little things like that. It will make a huge
mhm,
difference because people can get hung up on that and then they get stuck in a loop because there is no coming out of that. You're like, oh, the 5 stages, I'm done,
right,
you're out. No, it's
yep,
not like a program you go through. It's not even meant for you. It's not even for grief. Just leave that aside. Focus on what you actually want. Do you like being unhappy? Does it
Right.
feel great being sad? No, that's how simple it
It
is. I'm
is
not
it is
saying
a
it's easy,
choice.
but just exactly. Healing is a choice and you need to make it. And I want to share one quick example because I know we're sort of coming towards the end of our interview already, but I want to
Well, I
share
was
one
going to tell you,
example.
do you know what the sign of a great podcast is?
Yeah.
When 45 minutes feels like 5 minutes.
I know, I just looked at the clock. I'm like, whoops, we're already way through it. It's amazing. So I want to
Yeah,
say
go.
this one thing
I'll give you the
quickly.
last word here, and then we'll. Yeah, awesome.
I'm going
Thanks.
to wrap it up with that actually, because I think that's a perfect way to wrap it up. So I have a lot of moms that come to me because I predominantly work with widows, but I work with men, with moms, with anyone who comes to me. But that's my main audience. So a lot of moms come to me and say, "Well, I didn't have a choice. I had to do it for the kids." I'm like, "Ooh,"
Right.
my alarm bells come on. I'm like, "Hold on, I really want to say this to you." I said, "There are so many moms out there who don't make it out of bed in the morning because they don't feel they have
Right.
the strength, who choose different pathways, as we all know, like alcohol, like drugs, and unfortunately also suicide. So I
Right.
want you to keep that in mind. And I'm not saying that to you to suggest that as a path whatsoever. I'm saying that for you
Hmm.
to be aware of the choices that you have made. You are getting out of bed
Hmm.
every morning, amazing. You are feeding your kids every
Hmm.
morning, amazing. You are getting them to school, you're dressing them, you're doing all these things. So you feel like you didn't have a choice. Yet here you are having made all these choices on a
Sure.
daily basis, but you're not aware of that.
Thousands. Yep.
And once they are aware of it, they start owning it, and that becomes
Right.
empowering. And that's when you start growing and healing out of that. And I actually
Well, it
do believe
becomes.
when you say, grief never ends, I believe we can end that because it's just a matter of how you look at it. And for me, grief is a process, but when you get to the end of, when you get into happiness, when you live a life of loving life
Hmm.
after loss, like I do now,
Hmm.
then you still might have the odd day where it hits you and you cry. But for me, it's not like, oh, I'm grieving again. It is a memory that came up and affects me emotionally. Yeah. But I don't feel like, oh, here's the grief again. I don't feel like that. It's just like, a memory came up, it touched me and I cry. It's like when you haven't experienced grief, when you haven't experienced loss, and you watch a sad movie and it touches you and you cry, you people go like, oh, you're
Hmm.
grieving. It's
Right.
all these labels that we need to overcome, and that's what I'm gonna finish off with. Like, we really need to drop those labels and focus on what we want.
Well, you're a big inspiration to me, and I really am happy
Thank
our
you.
paths crossed.
Likewise.
And I certainly can see a lot of collaboration down the road.
Yeah.
And again, the end game for us is to, and it's a process in what we're trying to build as well. Because
Yeah.
someone asked me, "What is your end game?" And I said, "My last breath." That's all I got. I mean,
I'm
I
sorry,
don't
that made
have
me chuckle.
this goal to,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like my
Yeah.
last breath. That's my end game.
Yeah.
I had one person one time. I happen to get up in the morning. My dog's a Vizsla, so when storms come
Oh, I
by, he
love
gets really
them. I
hyper.
love fishless.
Yeah, so it's like 3 in the morning, and I get up, and I have to hug him and calm him because he eats everything. And so I get on Facebook, which you're not supposed to, and I'm like checking some things. And then like the next day, someone sent me a Facebook DM and said, "Do you ever sleep?" And I said, "Yeah, when I'm not awake." That was my answer. Well,
Yeah.
listen, it's an inspiration what you're doing. I really respect your
Thank you.
resiliency and the fact that you are showing how to do this, not telling people how
Mm.
to do it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of credibility. There's a lot of street cred, as we say, that goes
Mm.
with that.
I love
So
that.
keep living undeterred. And how can people reach you? What's the easiest way to reach you?
The easiest way is mariealessi.com. So it's just first name, last name.com, because you get all the links to my podcast, to my interviews, to my, programs that I run, to my group that you can join, to the books that I have written. So everything's on mariealessi.com.
And we'll share everything on our
Perfect.
podcast as well. So, listen, have a great rest of your day. And I
Thank
know it's
you.
evening for me over here; it's morning for you over there. And again, I really, really appreciate your time and best of luck.
Thank you so much. And I'll be following your tour. I can't wait to see you get started on that. It's amazing. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, we're excited. We're excited. Thank you.
Go you.